All right, today we are diving deep into a really foundational idea in theology, the doctrine of regeneration. This one, it gets right to the heart of what many Christians believe about salvation. So let's get into it. And this really sets up the central question we're going to tackle. Are we talking about a simple tune-up of someone's life, a renovation, or is it something way more radical, a complete and total rebirth into something entirely new? Rebirth or renovation? That's what we're here to unpack.
Okay, so to even start answering that, we've got to lay some groundwork. Let's get on the same page. What does it actually mean to be spiritually reborn?
So according to the source material, regeneration is this holy moment of spiritual birth. But here's the absolute key. The emphasis is all on where it comes from. It's not framed as something we achieve. Nope. It's presented as a divine act. God himself applying the work of Christ directly to a person's soul.
And the source is super clear about this distinction. This is not about just making a few improvements, turning over a new leaf. It's not a tune-up. It's presented as the birth of a brand new life. It's a fundamental shift. Think of it like moving from one kingdom to another, not just a new phase of the same old life.
And this is where we get to the real core of the issue, this big theological puzzle. It's kind of like the ultimate chicken or egg question for salvation. We know a person has to have faith, right? But where does that faith even come from? So what comes first? Does a person choose to believe and then they get new life? Or does God give them new life, which then allows them to believe? See the dilemma?
Okay, the entire argument we're exploring here really hinges on one core idea, the state of humanity before God steps in. The source describes a person's natural state as, well, spiritually dead. Think of it as being completely unresponsive to God. The idea is, in that state, a person is just unable, on their own, to even want or understand spiritual things. So, this leads to a very specific sequence of events. Step 1, the person is spiritually unresponsive. Step 2, God acts. Regeneration happens. He, metaphorically, breathes new life into them. And then, and only then, as a direct result of that new life, does that person show faith. So in this view, our belief is the result of God's work, not the cause of it. It's a huge distinction. And this quote just boils the entire idea down perfectly. Regeneration is God moving first. That's it. In this theological framework, God is always the initiator. Our faith, it's not the cause, it's the effect. Now, I know what you might be thinking. This view raises some pretty big questions, right? Some serious objections. So let's get right into them and see how the source material tackles these but what abouts moments. Okay, objection number 1. This is a really common one. It goes something like this. Doesn't God choose people because he looks ahead into the future, sees who's going to believe in him, and then he chooses them based on that foreseen faith? It makes a lot of intuitive sense to people. All right, so the text gives a 4-part answer to this. First, it argues that in the Bible, when it says God knows someone, it's often more active than just observing. It can mean to choose or to set apart. Second, it comes back to that core idea of spiritual unresponsiveness. The argument is, if God waited for us to choose him, well, no one would. Third, this whole objection kind of flips the script, right? It makes man the initiator, but the central claim we've been looking at is that God is the initiator. And finally, the text points to stories in the Bible where God is shown actively opening people's hearts, making it possible for them to believe. All right, let's tackle the second big objection, and honestly, this one is a big deal. The Bible is just full of verses calling people to repent and believe, right? Choose this day. So how on earth does that square with the idea that faith is something God gives before you can choose? Well, the way the source material resolves this is with a pretty deep paradox. It argues these two ideas aren't actually in conflict. Here's the line of thinking. The faith that God requires is the same faith that God supplies. So the command to believe stands, but the ability to actually do it is seen as a gift. When someone believes, from this perspective, they aren't kicking off their own salvation. They're simply acting on the new ability they've just been given. So you can see how all of this funnels into this massive, profound tension, right? It's the paradox between God's sovereignty, his total control, and our human responsibility. Let's dive into how this source wrestles with that. Wow, creature responsibility begins in the sovereign ordination of the Creator. That's a heavy one. Let's unpack that. The argument here is that our responsibility doesn't compete with God's sovereignty. Instead, it's founded on it.
The idea is that our choices actually matter because an absolute God ordained that they would.
And here's another critical distinction. This view isn't about God canceling our free will or forcing people like puppets. No, the idea is about transformation. He doesn't force you against your will. He changes your will. He gives you a new nature, a new heart that now genuinely desires the very things it used to reject.
And to kind of put this into perspective, the source points to the night sky. I mean, think about it. When you look up at the stars, you're seeing the handiwork of a God whose wisdom is just infinite. The argument is, if our little human minds can't possibly grasp all of that, why would we expect to perfectly understand the intricate mechanics of his sovereignty in something as profound as salvation? So why does any of this even matter? Why is this doctrine so important to so many people? Well, this final section reframes the whole thing. It's presented not as this hard, difficult doctrine, but as a source of incredible practical comfort. And I gotta say, this phrasing is powerful. It's not a shadow to hide from, but a shelter to rest in. That just completely changes the feel of it, doesn't it? It frames the doctrine as a source of deep peace and security, a place to find rest, not something to argue about.
And here's the breakdown of what that comfort looks like in real life. First, assurance. If your salvation depends on God, not you, that's a pretty solid foundation. Second, humility. You're not the hero of your own salvation story. Third, it can lead to boldness in things like prayer or sharing your faith, because the ultimate results aren't on your shoulders. And finally, comfort. A deep-seated trust that a sovereign God is working through everything, even the hard stuff. So we end up right back at the heart of this profound mystery. If God is the ultimate author of salvation, then what is the purpose of our response? If it all starts with a divine awakening, not our own choice, what does that mean for the choices we make every single day? This question really gets to the core of it all, inviting us to think of our faith not as the cause of our salvation, but maybe, just maybe, as the evidence of it.